Okay, next we're going to talk specifically about red blood cells. So I want to go over the functions and physiology of red blood cells so that you have an idea of what they do and how they work. So up here on our PowerPoint, it says red blood cells contain hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is the molecule within the red blood cell that transports oxygen. It also contains iron, and the iron is what makes our blood red. So hemoglobin is a transport protein. It fills up the red blood cell. So really the only function of a red blood cell is to carry oxygen, so it has lots of hemoglobin. Red blood cells are a biconcave disc, so they kind of look like a squished donut that the hole wasn't punched out. You can kind of see that. This just helps increase the surface area. Red blood cells are really flexible because they have to travel through all those capillaries, all those blood vessels. They are specifically designed for oxygen carrying, so they don't have the typical parts of a cell. They don't have a nucleus, no organelles. They can't divide on their own. Once they're born, they live a fast and furious life, and then they die. Now, we should have about 5 million red blood cells per drop. Remember, I averaged that out in the other video. So we have about 5 million per drop of blood. Women, you ladies might have a little bit less. Us guys may have a little bit more. But essentially, we have about 5 million per drop. All right. Now, new red blood cells are being created all the time. This is a crazy statistic. I think it's pretty cool. We create new red blood cells at a rate of about 2 million per second. So you are constantly making red blood cells and you're constantly recycling them. Now remember, new red blood cells are immature. So they're called reticulocytes. Reticulocytes are immature red blood cells, and they're going to circulate in the bloodstream as immature reticulocytes for a short period of time, and then they mature and become full-blown erythrocytes. Okay, so reticulocytes are the immature red blood cells. There's actually not a lot of them in our circulating bloodstream because they mature pretty fast. So only about 1 to 1.5% of all the blood cells in your blood are going to be reticulocytes. Now, if you're not making enough reticulocytes, that's when you have that disorder called anemia. So if you are anemic, you're not making enough reticulocytes, and they're not maturing into red blood cells. This can be due to a lot of different problems. So if you are anemic, don't go on WebMD and ask what you have, because it'll always be the worst case scenario, right? So it could indicate something really serious like leukemia. It could be a nutritional thing where you're not getting enough iron. Your body may not be responding to the hormone erythropoietin. So there's a lot of different things that can cause anemia. A high count of reticulocytes may indicate certain things like blood loss. Maybe you had a blood donation where you gave some blood and now you're low, so your body has to kick up the production of reticulocytes. Or maybe you ate some really healthy food that had iron in it. So either way, you may boost your reticulocyte production. Okay, let's look at hemoglobin specifically, because hemoglobin is that protein that's going to carry the oxygen. It's in the red blood cells, and it says here that hemoglobin carries oxygen, and about a quarter of the CO2 that is a waste product. So hemoglobin is going to carry that oxygen to our cells, release that oxygen so the cells can use it for cellular respiration. And then it's going to grab on to some of the CO2 and carry it away back to the lungs. Now, the hemoglobin is made up of two parts. It's, got this name hemoglobin, right? So it's got a heme group and it's got a globin group. Now, the globin group is made up of protein, 4 polypeptide chains, and it's what's carrying this CO2. So the CO2 is carried by the globin. The heme part contains iron, and that iron is what makes our blood red, but it's also what grabs the oxygen. So what we basically do is we have a chemical reaction. The iron in the hemoglobin grabs that oxygen, and we form rust. We form iron oxide because the iron and the oxygen are bonded together. That creates rust, iron oxide's rust, and that's what makes your blood red. Pretty awesome, huh? Okay, so let's look a little bit at hemoglobin. I've got a handout here, 19E, for us to look at hemoglobin. So here is our hemoglobin handout, and if I zoom in here a little bit, you can see kind of the structure of hemoglobin. So that blue area of hemoglobin is the globin. So it's 4 polypeptide chains of this globin. So that's the blue area. And then the heme groups are these little Saturn-looking saucers. So it says that we have 4 polypeptide chains of globin and then 1 heme group that's attached to each polypeptide chain. So when we make one hemoglobin molecule, it's going to be made up of 4 globin polypeptide chains and 4 heme groups, 1 attached to each of our polypeptide globin proteins. So this is what hemoglobin looks like. All right, this is the chemical formula or chemical composition of our heme group. All right. Now, what these are going to do is they're going to transport oxygen and CO2 and another molecule called nitric oxide that I'll mention here in a minute. So it says each hemoglobin molecule can carry 4 oxygen molecules from the lungs to our tissue. So heme carries the oxygen. Each heme can grab a hemoglobin, each heme group in the hemoglobin can grab an oxygen. That's what I'm trying to say. And the globin can carry some of that CO2 waste product. Now it says hemoglobin can also transport nitric oxide and supernitric oxide. Now, nitric oxide is NO. It's nitrogen and oxygen bonded together. We get it in the atmosphere. There's a little bit of nitric oxide because our atmosphere is made mostly of nitrogen and oxygen. So we naturally get some nitric oxide every time we breathe. That hemoglobin grabs it and delivers it to our body. What does nitric oxide do? Well, you probably have heard commercials talking about nitric oxide and how healthy it is for you. And we can also get nitric oxide, or our body can produce nitric oxide with some various foods that we eat. So they say beets, for example, are really good for you because they boost your nitric oxide production. Now, what nitric oxide does is it helps control your dilation of blood vessels. So we can vasoconstrict and we can vasodilate the blood vessels, and we can do it better if we have nitric oxide. So it says nitric oxide causes vasoconstriction, supernitric oxide causes vasodilation. And so if we have nitric oxide in our bodies, we can control our blood vessels better. This is why, guys, you may have heard those commercials about, erectile dysfunction and how you should take some product because it will give you a boost in your performance because it has nitric oxide. Well, there's some truth to that because you need blood vessels vasodilating for erectile dysfunction, and nitric oxide will help with that. So just a little tip for you. All right. So as we go through this, you can see the importance of hemoglobin and why it's in the red blood cells. All right. So I will catch you on the next video.